Well, it just started.
Yeah, that's true, because it's delayed. Okay, so we're here at the Autism Society, Newfoundland, Labrador, and this is our first live stream, so thank you for joining us. We're doing a question and answer session here. I'm going to start this off by saying if we go offline, my apologies. We'll try and come back as soon as we can. This is the first time we've done this, so bear with us. So, here we have 4 panelists that are going to answer your questions. So we have Dr. Sandra Luscombe here, works at the Janeway. We have Ashley Knoll, registered speech-language pathologist. We have Trudy Gould, Autism Canada and CAP Advisory Board member. And we have Katrina Bizak, who is a parent and as well as an educator. So this is Autism Awareness Month. We want to answer some questions. So we've compiled a bunch that are frequently asked here at the center and across the province, and we've gotten some from parents as well. You can also type in the box next to the video screen questions, and we will do our best to answer those as well. So without further ado, we're going to get talking. So one of the big questions that I get asked a lot when I give presentations in the community is like, what are some signs that I can look out for in my child that they may need to seek a diagnosis? So I'm going to ask Sandra if she can let me know a couple things that people can look out for that brings people to the doctor.
Sure. Well, I think probably the most common is a delay in speech. Yeah, and that would be one of the most common things in a very young child.
Yeah.
And certainly any repetitive or stereotyped types of movements or behavior. So kids that, small children that play with the same toys or play with the toys unusually or do things over and over and over again, perhaps at the exclusion of doing other things. Kids that aren't making good eye contact or don't seem to be interested in their siblings or other kids in the way of play.
Okay.
And probably the other thing that we see sometimes in children that may actually be very verbal and there's not an actual speech delay is a dysregulation of emotional control.
Mm-hmm.
So kids that really are having a hard time with happiness and sadness and
Okay.
kind of over the top reactions one way or the other. So sometimes we see that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I was going to say, so that's the kid side. So for adults.
I was going to add something to the kids. Apparently, for girls that were previously diagnosed as Asperger's, so no significant speech delay, you generally start running into social difficulties around about age 5 or 6. And that's actually when I started running into difficulties.
Yeah.
Before that, I was apparently a very social child.
Okay.
When I hit 5, 6, that stopped.
Yeah. Okay.
Other things that you can look for if your child is older or as your child gets older, strong passions for things, and they can be almost anything. The stereotypical ones that everyone sort of knows about are things like trains and cars and stuff, but I like science fiction fantasy.
Yeah.
And for years that was all I would read unless it was my assigned school books.
Yeah.
And I've come across people who have a fascination for washing machines, and they have to see the washing machines when they go into people's houses, and so they might be very verbal, but they want to know all about the washing machine, or they want to see the toilet, like
Okay.
they want to know about the make of the toilet. And so it's not just, oftentimes it's not just seeing the object or having an interest in the object, but they want to know the makes, the models, when they were made. They can tell you amazing things.
Facts
You know,
about it.
I have another kid who can tell you every statistic about every hockey league out there.
Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
Very verbal child.
I have one with the Titanic, knows all
Okay.
the information about the Titanic, number of
But the
survivors.
interest seems to be like in a very specific
Yeah,
area,
focused.
Yeah.
right? So that if you probably ask them anything outside of that area, they probably would be very disinterested.
Interested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they could tell you everything about the Titanic or
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing that people have found recently, the parents and educators have found recently, that particularly if you manage to link various things up to those passions.
Yeah. Like any
You can teach
therapy,
Absolutely.
intervention.
Yes.
You can teach them anything.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can teach kids
Yes.
anything because that's how I got interested in physics. That's how I got interested in
Wow.
biochemistry.
Cool. So we hear a lot about the importance of early intervention and early therapies, and so I guess one thing that I could ask Ashley here is like, what are the benefits of getting speech therapy in particular if you're having difficulties with speech early? Like what are the benefits of that, or I guess what are the challenges you would face if you had a wait list?
Well, certainly we'd like to know what level of understanding the child has, so we want to get them in for an assessment and try to figure out, are they understanding one-step commands? Are they understanding where their body parts are? And also we want to know what kind of language are they using as well. So we really need to get a sense. I mean, the core part of communication and life and enjoying life is being able to communicate, is being able to socialize with others.
Yep.
And with these deficits with children with autism, it's so important that you get a speech language pathologist in there. You get them working one-on-one with the child to try and build up all of those skills. And typically that's done through play, but showing the parents how to play with their child in a way where they can modify and tweak some certain techniques that they're using to really gain that joint attention and eye contact and engage them and really see what their true child is.
Yeah. So we talk about signs that we see when we're younger and early intervention. And so Katrina, when I know you have twins.
Yes.
2 little guys, and so when you first started noticing things, is this the kind of thing that you were seeing? Like,
well, it was interesting because Ashley is one of the first people that we went to, and both of my boys did have a speech. They were both behind, and when we, but I had stronger feelings about it. Adrian, my son Adrian, I had stronger feelings.
Yeah.
That he probably had autism. So we did go to a pediatrician, and then we went to Ashley, and she could speak. I don't mind. You can speak to like the type of testing. Like it was very clear in the type of behaviors that Christian displayed. He was his play was very functional. Adrian, the first thing he did, I think he sat and scratched the photocopier.
Photocopier, yeah. They, you get these children coming in, and so you get the neurotypical children coming in, and really just going for the toys. They want me. They want to grab the toys, even if they have a speech delay. There's still intention. They still want to play. However, typically the little ones who come in, who are having the red flags of autism, will come in and not so much interact with me, but look at different electronic devices was the big thing for Adrian. And scratch the photocopier, find the buttons, push the buttons, do the repetitive movements, as Sandra had
with
said.
the ball, like it wasn't
right.
It was like the ball wasn't, he had a little, and that was the thing. Like, I said, like he had an instant playmate that he could play with, and I'm just like, gosh, everyone's saying people with twins, it should be
he was
they got an instant playmate, and they weren't playing with each other. I mean, I think that was a huge sign for me.
Yeah.
I would just speak to this. It also depends on how you define play.
Yeah, that's true too.
Because for Adrian, that might be something he happens to enjoy doing.
Yep.
It's not what is typically considered play, but to him, if he gets enjoyment out of doing it, he could consider that play.
Yeah,
right.
And it was just a way probably of molding it a little more,
exactly,
to make it a little more functional. So instead of taking the ball and just looking at it and just not knowing if there was anybody else in the room, then like that's okay to a certain extent if he does that, because everyone or kids are interested in things, and it's okay if they're going to examine things, but for him to sit for 2 hours and look at this ball, that's
where you're completely hitting the nail on the head. Because there's one type of play and fixation that is good to a certain point, but when it inhibits learning and learning through observation and learning of others, that's when it becomes a problem. And I think that's, I guess, the biggest thing to take away from that is that with him, when you start playing appropriately, then you can engage with others. However, if you are just scratching at something and completely engaged and fixated on it, then you're not going to be seeing what's going out around your environment.
Yeah.
So, okay, I have a question here that came in from, this is from a parent. So I've heard it's possible for a young child or adult to lose their diagnosis of autism. Is this possible? Why would someone say something like that?
This tends, as far as I know, this tends to come from Jenny McCarthy
Okay.
situation.
Yep.
Her son actually was not autistic.
Okay. So people say like cured and things like that. Okay.
Loner cleft syndrome or something like that.
Yes.
I can't remember exactly what my sister said it was, but it wasn't actually autism.
Okay. Okay. So could this be that people, I guess, they're involved in early intervention, perhaps they make great strides, right? So the characteristics perhaps that they have when they were younger, they don't have when they're older, but it is possible that a lot of the challenges that they face, I mean, in their everyday life and their social interactions, in the way that they sense the world, that's probably still existing, even though on the outside we don't see that. Right?
Yes.
I mean,
Okay.
certainly for years, people who met me, who talked to me, probably wouldn't be able to tell I was autistic.
Okay. Yep.
And unfortunately, what that tends to lead to in the end is referred to as autistic burnout,
Okay.
where you've just been coping so long with a world that isn't suited to you that you can't take it anymore, and sensory issues go out of control, coping mechanisms go out of control, everything goes out of control. And that actually sort of happened to me in the years between 2008 and 2011.
Yeah.
So I've mostly come back from the burnout part of that, but I'm still more sensitive to things than I was before that period.
Yeah. So, were you going to say something?
Well, I was going to say that I think from my experience, I've worked in this area for 16 years since I started work in child development, and in my experience I've seen people make really great gains and have a lot less issues in their own life that they self-identify, because that's it. I mean, you know, what I might think is an issue, if it's not an issue for the person, then that's not really a problem. You know, it's such a personal way of looking at it. So I think that I've come across people who have done so well that no one would probably know they have autism. But many of those people tell me they still internally struggle with some sensory issues and some different things. It's interesting, the people who have come to me to ask me to take their diagnosis away haven't been those people. Now that's just my own personal experience.
Okay.
The people that have come are the ones that I think are still very obviously have autism, and their parents will say to me, you know, the issues that they're struggling with, but I think they're going through a period where they're having a really hard time acknowledging that they have something called autism, and that's why they want the diagnosis to go away. So there are people that we've re-looked at, you know, as they've gotten older, but I think most people do have, you know, some findings still. But it's such a, you know, I think as an adult, it's such an individual, personal thing.
It is,
right?
yeah.
So we talked before we started this. We were talking about, you know, neither one of us can say what a sensory issue might feel like or anything like that. So one of the questions that we had on the list here is like, what does autism feel like for the person? Like, what's the experience?
I feel that, well, there are sensory issues like lights.
Yeah.
The way I describe it on my blog is actually light hurts.
Yeah.
And particularly when I go outside at night, it's like claws against the blackboard.
Yeah.
Not just nails, but actually claws against the blackboard.
Really bad. Yeah.
Certain types of sound hurt. like one of the other questions you had there, I noticed, was sort of about a kid sticking
Yeah.
fingers in the ears.
Yeah, like why would a kid plug their ears?
Yeah. And the way I see it, that's one of two things. Either sound is hurting in some way.
Yep.
For me, it would be high-pitched sound or loud sound. Or, ironically enough, opera. Opera makes me nauseous.
Specifically opera.
Specifically
Probably
opera.
not the only person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna say. I don't know.
Alternatively, it might be a tactile issue.
Okay.
They can feel the earwax in their ears if it's driving them out of their mind.
That's a good point. Yeah.
That sometimes happens with me.
Yeah.
I can't tolerate spicy foods
Yep.
at all.
Yep. Okay.
And quite often I find that I need deep pressure to sort of let me know where exactly my body is.
Like where you are in space.
Yeah, yeah, sort of. It's called the proprioceptive system, and I sometimes have trouble with that.
Yep. Okay.
Apparently, I used to trip over air as a kid,
Okay.
and it wasn't really a problem with my balance because I could wander across logs holding up gardens with no problem. I could
Yeah.
climb, no problem. And it seemed to be, I just wasn't quite clear on where
Yeah.
the parts of my body were. But really, it varies from person to person. when it
I've
comes to
always
sensory
found it
issues.
so amazing that I can have one person with autism who, I'll just take the example of spicy food. They just, everything has to be bland, everything has to be plain. They just can't tolerate any strong taste or smell. And then I have other people who have autism who you cannot get hot tamale sauce hot
Yes.
enough for them.
Yes.
That because they crave the sensation. So, you know, people who crave movement, people who
Yep.
touch, and other people
Yes.
who really don't like it. It's
Because-
it's so
because
amazing.
it's sort of, some senses can be hypersensitive, some can be hyposensitive, and some can be a mixture of both depending on
Yeah.
what the
Yeah.
input is.
Yeah.
Like I love driving the car on the highway.
Yep.
I love takeoffs and planes.
Yep.
Because it pushes me. I get the G-force pushing me. I know someone who cannot tolerate the taste of mint, but loves spicy foods.
Interesting. You make an interesting point, and this ties into one of the questions about how two people can be so incredibly different. So one of the questions that we have here is, I have a friend who has two children with ASD. One does not talk, another talks all the time. How can they both be on the autism spectrum? It's just the difference, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No two people are the same. So,
And as far as we know, the wiring issues are somewhat the same, which is why they both have a diagnosis of autism spectrum. But the way it affects us is sort of
totally different.
totally
And
different.
the strategies that you
Yeah.
use, you know, I mean, like a lot of times, like, you know, I'm always, you know, in terms of like resources, I love giving advice to say, okay, you know, like, you know, go to this person or this person. But in terms of giving advice, I'm always saying, well, you know, I do this with my child, but I mean, I can't attest
It may not
that
work
it
for
will.
your
It may
child.
not work for
Yes.
your child whatsoever, because
Yeah.
your child might have different, you know, sensory needs, or may learn differently, may respond differently to things. So
Yeah.
And certainly I think that's why having professionals do assessments to see what it is they do and do not respond to. So I know the OTs that I work with will try, you know, various things, and they'll say, you know, he really did not like this, so we'll go this other approach and give you advice about in this particular individual.
Yep.
It seems that this, and it may change over time, was the other
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
And it's the same thing with speech pathology as well, and
Yeah.
that's why we have so many different treatment methods. I might be using a reference and regulate type approach with one child, and then with somebody else I might be using PECS with someone else, maybe
Yeah.
Hannon, you know, then the rollout of Jasper. Sometimes ABA works for some children, sometimes not. You know, it's very different and varies from one
Yeah.
child to the next. It's really
It's a big toolbox.
Yeah.
it is, and
Right?
you need to be
Yeah.
constantly assessing to see if your toolbox
Yeah.
is meeting the individual needs
Yeah.
of each child, because they're so
Yeah.
dynamic.
And
you
your
know.
own child
it
or
can change.
yeah.
You can
So
use
these
one
cookie
type
cutter
of-
approaches to treatment
Yes.
just
Oh, they
don't work. You know, you
Uh-huh.
might get the 20% that it works great for, but it's
Mhm.
like anything, you know, it has to be tailored for the
Yes.
child.
Yes.
And sensory issues aren't the only
No.
No.
issues, and
Yeah.
speech aren't the only issues, though speech crops up fairly often.
Yeah.
There's also executive function issues.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the executive function is basically the control center of your brain. It's what organizes everything.
Yep.
It's what initiates everything and tells you to stop things.
Right.
Yep.
I have trouble keeping my place clean,
Okay. Yeah.
and that seems to be very much an executive function issue. I just end up putting things down wherever, and before I know it, the place is a mess, and I'm so overwhelmed that I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You need to see my office, Drew.
Listen, that may not be autism. That's not like that too.
And I
But
think
I blame it on having children, of course.
but I think people that have ADHD, people that have autism, have
Yes.
a higher incidence of those.
Yeah,
That
it's
organization.
because
and,
both of them affect the executive
Yeah.
function,
Yeah.
and initiating things
Yeah.
can be a problem. Again, executive function issues, and stopping doing things can be a problem.
Yeah.
So you were mentioning your son likes to go out and just look at cars for passing by for 2 hours. Part of that might be he just doesn't know how to stop doing that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I think what it is that it ended up being some sort of behavior that is now, because he's in school, that it doesn't seem to be an issue when he gets in the car to go to school.
Yep.
But maybe something that it's his way of decompressing from the day. We don't know, but
Right.
but he realizes when the car stops and that it's time to go in the house that he just wants to stay out there and watch cars
Yeah.
and watch them and watch them.
Yeah.
And I mean, sometimes I have to pick him up bag of bones. I mean, if people would have
Yeah.
walked down the street and see me as a parent, I'm kind of thinking like, what is she doing to her child? But I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes like that's the realities of autism,
Oh,
right?
yes.
You know that
That's what you have to do.
Yeah.
sometimes like you know that you can give advice and you know and therapists and everything, you know, you get all the best type of advice and the first if this happens and then do this.
Yeah.
But then sometimes the reality is like, you know,
Yeah.
your kid is screaming
Yeah.
on the side of the road.
You've
and,
got to pick your battles.
you know,
Yeah.
so
For real.
yeah.
And two other things I want to mention. The first is what I call the communications chasm.
Mm-hmm.
It's like autistics are standing on one side of the Grand Canyon, and neurotypicals are standing on the other side.
Yep.
Or like a game of telephone, where one is the first person and one is the last
Do you
person.
get
and
the
messages-
message?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
messages get
Yeah.
scrambled. And a fair bit of that I can put down to how we perceive the world differently.
Yep.
And I mean, people say autistics can't read body language.
Yep.
It's a common thing. When I'm with more than two people, I have trouble reading anything but the broadest expressions of body language because it just takes too much processing power.
Yep.
However, autistics can read other autistics.
Okay.
I noticed this at social group. I noticed this in the meetings of the Canadian Autism Partnership Project Advisory Board. We go in there and there are more autistics in the room than there are neurotypicals, and we can read each other. We can understand each other.
That's fascinating.
That
I
is
have not
fascinating,
heard
right?
anyone say that before.
Yeah. We have a question that came in online here that I'm going to read out. My son is 2 and was just recently diagnosed. He started having night terrors, and I'm wondering if this is common in the spectrum and what I can do to help. So if anyone's experienced that before or if you've heard of it before. I guess I have a really good friend who, when she was little, had night terrors. So like really, really intense dreams, really intense. So I don't know if you guys.
I've not. I don't know that it's more common in people with autism than not. It's not uncommon in childhood.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing is that it's really dependent on in different stages of sleep, and some people and
Okay.
some children have them, and some people will go on to have kind of sleep phenomena as they get older. They might be terrors, but they, might
Sleep disturbances.
like the old hag or whatever when they get older.
Yeah.
And so the biggest thing is to make sure they're safe and to reassure them. But most of the kids don't remember that they've had this, and so it's actually way more frightening for the parents,
Yes.
than it is for the children. And safety is the biggest thing, and but I don't know that I've never heard that it's higher in people with autism.
Okay. And if someone wanted to, I guess, know more about it, or if this person wrote the question, is there do people specialize in this part?
Certainly speaking to your pediatrician is a good idea.
Okay.
And to make sure that what they're seeing is actually a night terror and not something else, like it's not a night seizure or, so it would be important to talk to someone about it. Like I would think your family doctor, or pediatrician, if they had concerns, they would probably refer you to a neurologist.
Yeah, okay.
But if it seems like a typical night terror, not indicative of any kind of other issue, they would probably just reassure. But it's always good to talk to someone to make sure what we're identifying as a night terror is actually a night
what
terror.
it is.
Right?
Yeah, okay. So this is another one of our questions here. What is the best way to interact with or talk to someone who is nonverbal? Friends and neighbors and even family don't know what to say to my child and sometimes mostly ignore them.
I would say act like you would act with anybody else.
Yes. Okay.
Just because they're nonverbal doesn't mean they don't understand you.
Yes. Yep.
They probably have just a different mode of communication. They could be communicating through some type of electronic programming, through pictures, through sign language, through gesture. Most people typically have a way of communicating.
Yep.
They've functioned for that long.
Yep.
And I'm assuming that have done well. So I would just treat them like anyone else and try to engage with them on their developmental level. If you can have, if you have any sense of it, and it might be hard to gauge, but I would say it would be best to speak with the mother of the child and ask her what are your child's interests. How can I try and engage? Is it a 10-year-old who has the developmental ability of a 2-year-old? If so, let's get on the floor, let's do some roughhousing, play with bubbles, Is it having the intellectual capacity or developmental capacity of a 10-year-old? And if so, well, let's go play Angry Birds or something like that, So I think it's just about engaging on their developmental level and treating them like an equal, and you'll figure out how to interact with them. Just pay attention to their gestures and how they're communicating.
I mentioned before I've got a blog.
Yeah.
I have a fairly large blog circle, a number of autistic adults, and some parents of autistics.
Yep.
It might work.
Okay, we're live again.
Okay. Well, I was talking about presuming competence in the parents, and one's child is fairly echolalic.
Okay, yep.
And
So,
repeating.
repeating.
Yes.
Okay.
She uses scripts from her favorite shows and songs and such. And she's bright, she's outgoing, she loves singing at concerts and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
An autistic who's truly an extrovert. But she will come to her mother and talk about things that she would have heard years and years ago, back when they didn't realize that she was listening, that she was understanding this.
Yeah.
And it's just, she takes the time to process, and it can take her years to process it, but she hears and she remembers.
So it's a big thing. Just because you're not speaking doesn't mean you're not understanding.
And another one, her daughter is partly verbal, but she has sort of what she calls a brain-body disconnect.
Okay.
What comes out her mouth is not necessarily what she's thinking.
Okay. Interesting.
So she now mainly communicates via iPad and whatnot, but very intelligent little girl.
Yeah.
I believe she's either 12 or 13 now, and she's highly intelligent, and once she managed to be able to start typing, And it took a while because not only does she have the mouth disconnect, she has issues
The motor.
with motor coordination and stuff.
Yeah.
But she was hearing and understanding things even as a young child.
Interesting.
And her mother said they would read to her from books, and she would sort of be going, go on, and
Yeah.
they thought she wasn't understanding, but
She
she
was-
was absorbing, and she was reading it all,
Okay.
Yeah.
and she was
Same
getting
thing
bored because
happened-
they were on the same page.
Same thing happened with my son. I mean, you know, his receptive
Yes.
skills are very, very high.
Yeah.
You know, he can understand everything that you're saying to him. You know, so I mean, if someone would come into the door, you know, like he understood enough, like, you know, of the social. Tell him, like, okay, socially. I don't think we say, okay, socially, you go to the door, but you know, we would lead by example. Let's go to the door and let's say hi to
We do
people. You know, so
Yeah.
then he'd come and say hi, and
Yeah.
when people would leave, he'd say bye. But then the same thing, he was constantly going through these books. I mean, probably from the time he was, oh my gosh, 18 months old. Poor Ashley. I mean, the books in the office were just, I mean, he went through this
I
ripping
pulled out one of
stage.
those books the other day and I thought about Adrian right away.
I mean, he would just check out the strangest books. I mean, he'd want to go to bed every night with one of my Shakespeare books, or like, you know, at the time I was
Cool.
like, great, just I don't care as long as you go to bed. Like,
Yeah.
take whatever book you want. If it's Shakespeare, good for you.
Yeah.
So at some point, like, you know, not very long ago, you know, he was going through this, you know, leap book, and he was reading it.
Right?
Just, you know, and then realized it's more motor, you know, like that he really understands everything, but it's more in the particular forming of the sounds and getting
Yeah.
them out and things like that are more, but I mean, he can read at a grade 1 level. you know?
And also
Yeah.
receptive speech and expressive speech, so hearing and understanding versus talking, can be different.
Yeah.
When I have my meltdowns, they happen to all of us, I can't really talk much. All I can say is no, I can't. Generally just no, or go like that. But I can still understand what everyone's saying around me.
Yeah.
And that was actually another point about living as an autistic. Is meltdowns.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if there are any questions on the list about that, but
I think
know.
that everyone who lives with someone who has autism or knows someone or has a friend knows
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
yeah. When I have my meltdowns, they're what another log circle acquaintance of mine calls internal meltdowns.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't tend to lash out. I start crying, and I go almost nonverbal, as I just mentioned. And it can take me ages to stop. I just can't.
Yeah.
And basically what happens in meltdowns is something overwhelms you. Most of the time with me recently has been frustration, but there's also sort of sensory. I'm getting somewhat overloaded on sensory stuff, so it's easier to get frustrated, and so easier to have a meltdown and stuff like that. But when I was a kid, it's possible that I had what the friend calls external meltdowns, which is lashing out meltdowns.
I think we see that more with young kids a lot.
Yes.
Hey?
And that's the hard thing, because
Yes.
a lot of times, like with regular kids, usually it's like sometimes they have meltdowns because they're seeking attention, or you know,
temper tantrums.
You know, they have tantrums because because they can't express what they want, or they want something and they're looking for the attention. But a lot of times, like you said, with kids on the spectrum, it is some sort of sensory thing, and
And the
Sensory
rigid
or
behavior
emotional,
as well, you know, not being flexible enough to say, okay, well, we're not going to Walmart, but we have to go to Costco. Okay, I think I can do it. I think I can go to Costco when I was prepped to go to Walmart, you know, just being able to break that and say, it's okay if I don't do this.
And I think as a parent, like, I have to say, it's really important. It's really easy to kind of give in to things to your kids, like, you know, and any kid.
Yes.
Because it's, you know, like, you know, your life's going to go a lot easier. I mean, like, I was cutting up muffins for my little guy, and then, you know, one day he just had a meltdown because I wouldn't cut the muffin for him, you know, and I'm just like, you know, in a real life situation, he's going to be somewhere, and there's not going to be someone to cut up his muffin for him, you know.
Yeah.
So, like, sometimes you have to be able to push back and say certain things that, you know, it's hard at first, but, you know, like, you know, mom's not always going to be there to, you know, yes, it's going to be a break in his routine or whatever, but it's going to be better off for him in the long run. And sometimes that can be autism, but it could be any kid that and that you have to kind of sometimes think, just because he has autism doesn't mean that he can't accept certain change. You know?
I know there are issues with external meltdowns, lashing out. Sometimes kids and adults both can get violent. I would recommend going to searching for the blog Emma's Hope Book and looking up
Emma's Hope Book?
Emma's Hope Book.
Emma's Hope Book, okay.
And looking up, doing a search on violence, because the mother, this is the kid who is partly verbal but has the brain-body disconnect. During one of the situations where parents try to murder their autistic kids, she went and did 2 blog posts on violence among autistics, and basically asked both autistics and other parents to tell about their experiences and what might have helped deal with that.
Yeah. And so she has this all online.
She has she has 2 blog posts.
Okay. We can get the link for that too and share it for people. We just got, I'm going to do one more question that we got online, and then we're going to summarize and clue it all up. Okay, so we just got one that says, moving into adulthood, what are the most important things to concentrate on learning? I hear so much about socialization, but I know there must be much more. Thanks.
Okay, life skills. Very
Life
definitely
skills.
life skills.
Okay.
Financial planning.
Okay, yeah. And this could tie in with the executive functioning piece as well, right?
Yes, I don't have issues with other people's money when I've been a treasurer for a board or something, but with my own money, it can be an issue. Doing things like preparing a meal, grocery shopping,
Making a daily schedule.
Yeah. Keeping your environment clean, keeping yourself clean. Those are so important, and they don't tend to get taught.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
How to do laundry. How to rent an apartment.
Yep.
How to arrange your transportation.
Yep.
Those are some issues.
Yeah, life skills.
That some of them I ran into, some of them I learned just fine myself, but...
Yeah, and we can also say that here in town we have the Connections group for adults who have autism, so a lot of peers help each other out with that kind of stuff. Also, if anyone has questions about it specifically, they can always reach out to us, and we can help people with those life skills, and like even if it's, how do I use the Metrobus? We can help you figure that out. So that's definitely something that we can help with, the transition. So we've already been booted off YouTube once, so we're gonna summarize. We're gonna summarize our time here now. So it is Autism Awareness Month, and we do want people to learn more about autism and feel comfortable talking about it. Like, you don't need to feel uncomfortable saying the word autism. Like, that's fine. So I guess maybe if one of you wants to, or all of you want to let me know one thing, if you could have, pretty quick, if you could have people know about autism, what would it be? What do you think?
I would say the importance of a speech language pathologist.
Okay.
I feel like the government really takes us for granted. As we all know, there's a huge wait list for services, not only for speech pathology, but for occupational therapy as well. Let's see, pediatrician, all of this.
Yep.
So our Newfoundland Labrador Association of Speech Language Pathologists and Audiologists has formed a special interest group, and it's for autism advocacy.
Cool.
And I'm the chair of that group. And with that group, we're basically trying to become part of the decision-making process with government to try and get in there and say, hey, we're important.
Yep.
We're an important
SLPs
piece
are important.
of this of this puzzle, and we need to help guide the government on the services, as well as pediatricians and occupational therapists as well.
Yep.
And we need to try and all come together and get on the same page and work towards efficiently and effectively assessing and treating autism.
Yep.
And really, we have reached out to government over the past year, and even more so. And I think where we might end up having to go with this is to really get parents and families involved.
Yeah.
That's what's happened in, I know, British Columbia with a parent court case, and they end up really changing the whole way the system was.
Yep.
So the government used to, give a certain amount of money, say for example as in Newfoundland, for the ABA treatment, and that's all you're allowed to spend it on. Whereas now in British Columbia, you're allotted a sum of money, and you're allowed to decide, do you want to spend it on speech pathology, OT, reference and regulate, Jasper, ABA? What do you want to spend it on with the guidance of a professional? And here, just with the governmental level, I feel like there's maybe one individual or two individuals that are kind of working on this, and we'd love to come together and work with them.
And so if parents want to learn more about how they can help you guys out with that, they can get in touch with us here, and we have Ashley's contact info, or we can put a link for that as well, because we've been in touch with them. So that's awesome. Importance of SLPs, and that they need to be at the decision-making table. Sandra, do you have something that you would like people to know about autism that perhaps isn't common knowledge?
Well, I guess everyone is different and they're individuals, and so, just because you may know a couple people with autism and they have certain issues, don't assume that someone else with autism and you meet them have the same issues or that they have any issues, and just don't be afraid of people with autism. Like,
that's a very good one.
Just talk, like, if you know someone has autism, just treat them like everybody else, and not be afraid to say it to them, is there anything that really bothers you that you want me to do, or
ask the person.
Talk to the person, and just treat them like everybody else.
Okay. Katrina, do you have one?
I think like the biggest thing I could say is that really just advocating, because no one is going to be more invested in your kids than you are.
Yep.
So it is a multidisciplinary approach, and unfortunately sometimes that means, for me initially, it meant I kind of felt I was running a 100-meter dash, right, when in reality I realized probably when I got maybe a year or so into the diagnosis that I'm like, I need to better prepare. This is going to be a marathon, right? So I'm putting all my money, I'm putting all the resources,
effort,
everything going to the appointments, and then I realized, I'm feeling emotionally exhausted.
Taking care of yourself.
So self-care.
That's mine.
Self-care it's very important for everybody, because realizing that autism is a disorder, but as well, like, as a caretaker, I mean, in order to be the best parent you can be, you have to take care of yourself as well.
Take care of yourself. Okay. Judy, you want?
Partly I want to echo Sandra's statement. Autism seems to be very much a part of human neurodiversity. We're learning more and more about that now, and we're thinking at a minimum autism, 1% of the population are autistic, and that's a fairly significant number when you're talking about populations. And just because we perceive the world in a different way doesn't mean we're not human, essentially. We're just as human as anyone else. We just have a different perception of the world, and therefore different experiences.
Okay. I think that that's an awesome note to end it on. So I want to thank everybody for tuning into this, and we're gonna do this again because I think it went really well. So if anyone has questions that weren't answered, you can email them to themion, HEMEON at autism.nf.net, and I will get the answers for you. Just share this video once it's out because we want to teach as many people as we can about autism and make everyone feel comfortable and welcome, and
and willing to ask.
Ask about autism. Okay, so you can stop it now, Greg.